The clattering sound came from the darkness. The clock read 2 in the morning. My office should have been locked tight. My wife Eleanor had passed away 3 years earlier. That room still held everything that belonged to her. Her blueprints, journals, and even the steel box containing the inheritance documents. It was sacred ground. But tonight someone had used a duplicate key to break into my fortress. The original key was still in my jacket pocket. Whoever this was had been preparing for this quietly for a long time. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this. The people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Leave comment number 1 so we can begin the story, and do not forget to subscribe. You are going to love how this one ends. I moved lightly across the wooden floor. The familiar creaks had long ago been eliminated by walking close to the walls. One advantage of being an architect is knowing every inch of the house you built with your own hands. I cracked the door open. The glow from a phone screen illuminated Chloe's face. My sweet, polite daughter-in-law. The woman who always claimed she did not care about money. Yet at that moment her eyes gleamed with reckless greed. Her hands hurried through stacks of blueprints. She was searching for the inheritance provisions meant for Ethan, my son. I stood in suffocating silence, watching my daughter-in-law rummage through my late wife's legacy with a stolen key. The sense of betrayal and insult shot down my spine like electricity. The family structure I had worked so hard to protect was being hollowed out from within by a parasite. She was not just searching through paperwork. She was trampling on Eleanor's memory. She was putting a price on this house, a price on my life, and a price on my son's love. Rage swelled inside my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. A crack in a wall cannot be repaired by smashing it apart. I needed to know how deep it went. I did not turn on the lights. I did not storm in shouting. I simply stood there, blending into the darkness, watching the naked truth unfold. Chloe let out a sigh of relief when she found the blue folder. She raised her phone and photographed every page. Each click of the camera felt like a hammer, striking the last remnants of my patience. She had no idea that the core blueprint of this house had already been changed, and the trap designed for her greed had officially been set in motion. The blue glow from Chloe's phone screen suddenly disappeared. Darkness quickly swallowed the office once again. She tiptoed out of the room. I stepped deeper into a recess in the hallway. As I watched her silhouette glide past, a chill settled in my chest. Betrayal always begins with the smallest cracks. I followed her with my eyes, and my mind drifted back to a year earlier, to the day this woman first entered my family. It was an autumn evening. Ethan had brought his girlfriend home to meet me. I had prepared a warm dinner. I wanted to welcome the woman who might spend the rest of her life with my son. But a seasoned architect does not judge by glossy paint on the surface. He studies the foundation. From the moment Chloe stepped through the front door, she revealed the instincts of someone who measured value. She did not pause to look at the family photographs filled with memories. Instead, her eyes swept across the decorative moldings on the ceiling. She lightly tapped a solid oak column with her fingers, as though estimating the thickness of the wealth behind it. My discomfort began to grow during dinner. The moment Ethan stepped away to the kitchen for more water, Chloe's mask slipped. She did not ask about my health. She did not ask about Ethan's life. Her first question caught me completely off guard. She asked about the property taxes in the neighborhood. She wanted to know how much it cost to maintain the house. Then, in a casual tone, she began probing into my investments. She wanted to know how many shares I still owned in my former architectural firm. I sat quietly studying every small movement. There was no warmth in her eyes, no sign of someone deeply in love. There was only the cold calculation of a business person evaluating a profitable opportunity. Ethan returned to the table wearing his innocent smile. My son was completely blinded by love. He could not see the monster sitting across from him. A deep sense of unease crawled down my spine. A foundation built on endless greed can never support true happiness. That night, after they left, I stood alone on the balcony for a long time. I knew a storm was moving toward this house. Chloe had not come to become a homemaker or a devoted wife. She had come to become an economic parasite. She wanted to possess everything Eleanor and I had spent a lifetime building. What I never anticipated was how quickly her boldness would grow. The probing questions at dinner had evolved into something far worse. Now she had been standing inside my office with a stolen key. After Chloe returned to her room, I went back into my office. I opened the hidden drawer beneath my desk. The blue folder she had just photographed was nothing more than bait. She believed she had finally uncovered the secrets of this family's wealth. But she had no idea that the moment she pressed the shutter button for the final photograph, she had personally signed her own eviction order. I lowered myself into the worn leather chair and ran my fingers across the wooden surface of the desk. This room had once been filled with Eleanor's laughter. She had been a gentle woman, but her instincts were as precise as a compass. 15 years earlier, when the cruel disease first began to consume her body, Eleanor had taken my hand. She looked directly into my eyes and spoke words that remained carved into my memory to this day. She told me that the greatest asset I would ever possess was not the buildings I had constructed, but Ethan's safety. My grief for Eleanor mixed with my anger toward Chloe, creating a storm inside me. I could not allow my wife's legacy to fall into the hands of a predator. After the dinner, when I first saw through Chloe's true nature, I knew I could not sit back and do nothing. A good architect always designs a backup support system capable of withstanding the strongest shocks. I decided to build a legal fortress to protect my son. Over the following week, I worked closely with the family attorney. Together, we established an irrevocable trust and an airtight prenuptial agreement. Many people would have called me paranoid. Others would have said I was interfering with my son's happiness. But 4 decades in the construction industry had taught me a painful lesson. Kindness without steel boundaries is simply weakness waiting to be exploited. I was willing to play the role of the controlling father, if it meant Ethan would remain protected. The prenuptial agreement was designed like a bulletproof shield. It completely separated my family's assets from their marriage. If the relationship ever collapsed, Chloe would not receive a single dollar from the trust or this house. I knew Ethan would object if he learned about it. My son was too kind, too trusting. So I quietly included a special provision within the documents, a provision that could only take effect with my written approval. I stared at the steel box Chloe had searched through moments earlier. She was probably celebrating right now, convinced she had uncovered every secret surrounding my wealth. She believed those documents were her ticket into a world of privilege she had never earned. But she was hopelessly inexperienced compared to a man who had spent a lifetime calculating risks and reading intentions. She had no idea that the pages she photographed contained a trap hidden in plain sight. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Across the courtyard stood the building where Ethan and Chloe were staying. The light in their room was still on. I knew Chloe was busy sending those photographs to someone. My fortress had already been designed, and Chloe had just stepped into its most dangerous chamber. A faint smile crossed my face as I stood in the darkness. This game had only begun, and Chloe's next move would push her own marriage toward a tragedy from which there would be no return. That was when I finally realized something terrifying. Chloe did not just want my money. She wanted to destroy my son's well-being to get it. The thought struck my chest like a knife as I watched Ethan's life unravel after the wedding. My legal fortress remained secure for the moment, but my son was being worn down day by day. Chloe had achieved her first objective by marrying into this family. The extravagant wedding had been nothing more than a grand performance, draining every dollar Ethan had spent a lifetime saving, all so she could fill her social media accounts with glamorous photographs. My frustration grew with every passing week. Ethan had once been a young man overflowing with energy, carrying the same passion for music that his mother had cherished. Now, he looked like a wandering ghost. My son was working 60 hours a week at a technology company just to keep up with the endless expenses Chloe created. She pressured him to buy a new apartment in the expensive West Loop district or move into my house where she could maintain greater control over him. Ethan was exhausted, yet he continued to smile, desperately trying to preserve the illusion of a happy marriage. I still remember one afternoon when he came to visit me alone. He collapsed onto the sofa. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His hands trembled from lack of sleep. I could see the widening cracks spreading through his spirit. While Ethan worked himself to exhaustion, Chloe spent her days feeding an extravagant lifestyle online. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, endless purchases charged to Ethan's credit cards. She treated my son like an inexhaustible printing press for money. I tried to warn him, again and again. I told him that any relationship built on unequal responsibility and financial imbalance would eventually collapse from within. But love had made him deaf. He always found excuses for her. He insisted Chloe was still young. He said she needed time to adjust to married life. His tolerance only fueled the greed of the parasite attached to him. And Chloe never seemed satisfied. She always wanted more. My patience finally reached its limit when I uncovered another secret. Chloe had been quietly pressuring Ethan to sign for a new mortgage loan using the house Eleanor and I treasured most as collateral. She claimed she needed capital for her consulting business. A perfect plan to hollow out the foundation of my family's wealth. Watching my son being drained of his strength, I knew I could no longer remain a distant observer. I could not allow the entire structure to collapse. It was time to act. Carefully. Precisely. Without mercy. I picked up the phone and called an old friend who operated one of the city's most respected private investigation firms. 2 days later, the first report landed in my hands, and what it revealed about my seemingly sweet and devoted daughter-in-law was far worse than anything I had imagined. The documents did not expose simple greed. They exposed a hidden life, and the moment I read the first page, I understood that Chloe had never intended to become part of this family at all. She had entered it with a plan that had begun long before she ever met my son. The investigator's report sat neatly on my desk. Every page stripped away another layer of Chloe's carefully crafted mask. The daughter-in-law who constantly bragged about her successful media consulting business had built her reputation on a lie. The company did not legally exist. There were no registrations, no legitimate business records, no clients, no employees. It was a ghost company she had invented to justify a life of idleness and dependence. I turned to the surveillance photographs attached to the report. While Ethan worked himself into exhaustion at the office, often staying past midnight to finish demanding projects, Chloe followed a very different schedule. Her days were spent in some of the most expensive cafes in the city. She wore designer clothing. She staged glamorous photographs for social media. She laughed with friends and posed beside luxury purchases she had never earned. Every extravagant bill led back to Ethan's accounts. Every swipe of a credit card came from my son's labor. She was living like royalty on his sacrifice. A true economic parasite. Anger tightened in my throat. The entire structure now stood exposed before me. This was not merely selfishness. It was the blueprint of a marriage scam. She had used beauty and carefully rehearsed affection to trap a decent man. She had transformed Ethan's love into an endless banquet for her greed. Not once did the report reveal genuine concern for the husband supporting her lifestyle. Everything revolved around what she could take, nothing around what she could give. Her selfishness had reached astonishing levels. If you were in my position, watching a stranger quietly measure the value of everything you had built, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately, or would you prepare for war in silence? Leave comment number 2 if you would fight, quietly. Leave comment number 3 if you are still undecided. I chose to fight quietly. An architect never tears down a rotten support column before erecting the scaffolding needed to hold the structure together. I did not call Ethan to criticize him. I did not rush to confront Chloe. One final piece was still missing. I needed proof that she had deliberately targeted the steel box in my office. Fortunately, the miniature camera I had hidden on the bookshelf had captured every second of her break-in the previous night. Now everything was complete. The foundation of Chloe's deception had been fully exposed. It was time to step out of the shadows. I gathered the documents, photographs, and memory card containing the footage into a leather envelope. Then I drove straight to the apartment they rented in West Loop. I knew a storm was coming. What I did not anticipate was that Chloe had already prepared her first strike. The photographs she had secretly taken from my office had given her enough confidence to launch a reckless scheme of her own. The moment I stepped through the apartment door, I knew something was wrong. Ethan was standing in the living room. His face was pale. His eyes were filled with confusion and disappointment, and Chloe was crying. Not quietly, not naturally. She was performing. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clung to my son's arm. The instant she saw me, she pointed a trembling finger in my direction. Then she delivered the accusation she had clearly rehearsed long before I arrived. Dad has been spying on us. The room fell silent. My grip tightened around the leather envelope. Because in that moment, I realized something dangerous. Chloe was no longer trying to steal the family's money. She was trying to destroy the trust between a father and his son. And that was a mistake she would soon regret more than anything she had done before. The door to the West Loop apartment had barely opened when the scent of Chloe's expensive perfume hit me. The tension inside the living room was immediate. Ethan sat on the sofa with his head lowered, his fingers tightly intertwined in front of him. He looked exhausted, defeated. The moment Chloe saw me step inside, she showed no fear whatsoever. Instead, she sprang to her feet. In her hand were printed copies of the documents she had photographed inside my office. She had decided to strike first. Without hesitation, Chloe launched into the role of the victim. She turned toward Ethan with tears already forming in her eyes. Then she pointed at me. Her voice trembled with manufactured outrage. She accused me of being a tyrant, a controlling father, a selfish old man obsessed with manipulating his son's life. She waved the papers in front of Ethan and claimed I had secretly created trusts and legal barriers specifically to exclude her from the family. She insisted I had never respected her, never accepted her, never treated her as one of us. Every sentence was carefully crafted to transform me into a villain in my son's eyes. The shamelessness of it made my blood boil. But I remained perfectly still, my back straight, my expression calm, like a load-bearing column designed to withstand an earthquake. I watched as she demanded rights to property she had never helped build. She insisted Ethan force me to transfer part of the ownership of the house Eleanor and I had cherished for decades. She called it her legal entitlement, her reward for supposedly sacrificing so much for this family. The louder she shouted, the more clearly her greed revealed itself. Every word stripped away another layer of the mask she had worn for years. Across the room, Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were filled with exhaustion and confusion. My son was trapped between the father who had raised him and the woman he still believed he loved. He thought this was merely a legal misunderstanding. Nothing more. Seeing his hesitation, Chloe became even bolder. She declared that if I refused to transfer ownership of the house or surrender control of part of the estate, she would file for divorce. Then she threatened lawsuits, defamation claims, public accusations. She believed the photographs she had stolen gave her leverage. She believed she held the winning hand. I looked directly into her eyes and said nothing. The silence changed everything. Her voice weakened. The shouting slowed, then stopped completely. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared on her face. The room fell into a chilling silence. Slowly, I placed the leather envelope onto the glass coffee table. My gaze never left hers. Then I smiled. A cold, deliberate smile, because it was finally time for Chloe to see the true structure of the trap she had stepped into. I unfastened the envelope. Inside were several documents. I removed the first one, a legal filing bearing the official seal of one of the state's most respected law offices. Without a word, I slid it across the table toward her. Chloe snatched it up immediately. Her confidence lasted less than 3 seconds. I watched her eyes move across the first page, then reach the figure printed in bold type. The color drained from her face. Her mouth fell slightly open. The arrogance vanished. The anger vanished. Even the tears vanished. All that remained was pure terror, because the number she was staring at was not the value of the estate she hoped to claim. It was the amount she had unknowingly made herself liable for under the fraud and unlawful access provisions triggered by the documents she had stolen. And for the first time since entering my family, Chloe realized she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The photographs she thought were her greatest weapon had just become the strongest evidence against her. The moment I spoke the number $2.5 million, the real monster inside Chloe finally revealed itself. The luxurious living room suddenly felt as suffocating as a tomb. I pointed to the legal document resting on the table. That figure represented the true value of the trust Eleanor had established for Ethan, a fortune large enough to provide comfort, security, and prosperity for the rest of his life. Chloe's eyes widened instantly. A raw hunger flashed across her face. She stared at the number the way a starving person might stare at a banquet. For a brief moment, pure greed overwhelmed every attempt at self-control. But the smile forming on her lips never had a chance to bloom. I turned the page. Everything changed. The next document was the prenuptial agreement, the legal fortress I had spent years designing. I looked directly at Chloe as the color slowly drained from her face. Then I began explaining the provisions one by one, every asset, every account, every dollar held within the trust. All of it belonged solely to Ethan. The trust was protected under strict legal safeguards. It remained completely separate from the marriage, and in the event of divorce, none of it could become marital property. Not a dollar. Not a single cent. Chloe lunged forward and grabbed the documents. She flipped through the pages frantically. Her hands shook so violently that the edges of the paper began to tear. The transformation was horrifying to watch. The helpless victim she had pretended to be vanished completely. In its place stood someone consumed by panic, consumed by greed, consumed by the realization that everything she believed she was entitled to was slipping away. Then understanding struck her. The steel box she had broken into the night before had been bait. The photographs she had stolen were worthless. Every clause she thought she had uncovered required my written authorization before it could ever take effect. Her prized weapon had become useless. The shock quickly turned into rage. Chloe threw the documents onto the floor. The sound echoed through the apartment. Then she began screaming. Not arguing. Not defending herself. Screaming. Like an animal cornered with nowhere left to run. She turned toward Ethan and demanded his support. She begged, then threatened, then pleaded again. But Ethan remained seated. Silent. Motionless. Watching. For the first time since their wedding, my son looked at his wife as though she were a stranger, because for the first time he was seeing the truth. Not a loving partner. Not a devoted wife. Not a victim. Just a woman obsessed with a number. $2.5 million. I rose from my chair and straightened my jacket. An architect knows when a structure can no longer be saved. Ethan's marriage had collapsed the moment the foundation of deception beneath it was exposed. I looked at Chloe one final time. She stood there trembling with fury, breathing heavily, her carefully crafted world falling apart around her. Before leaving, I spoke a single sentence. I told her she should prepare herself for what would happen within the next 48 hours. Then I walked out, leaving behind a battlefield of shattered illusions. I knew Ethan needed time. Time to think. Time to grieve. Time to make the final decision for himself. But I also knew something else. The deadliest blow against Chloe had not yet been delivered. It was not hidden within the trust. It was not buried in legal documents. It was not contained in any financial record. The true weapon had been waiting quietly for 15 years, locked away among Eleanor's most treasured possessions, a priceless gift she had entrusted to me before her death. And once Chloe discovered what Eleanor had left behind, she would realize that losing the money was the least of her problems. One day after the explosion at the West Loop apartment, Ethan drove to my house on his own. My son looked as though he had just survived a serious illness. He said nothing. He simply walked into the old family living room and sat down in silence. I could see it in his eyes. His heart was breaking apart. The truth about Chloe had been far more brutal than someone as loving and trusting as Ethan could have imagined. I did not lecture him. I did not tell him that I had been right. Instead, I walked to a glass cabinet and removed a small oak box covered with years of dust. Then I placed it on the table in front of him. Inside was a single letter. The paper had yellowed with age. These were the final words Eleanor had written before she closed her eyes forever 15 years earlier. Somehow, she had seen it coming. She had understood the strength and weakness that existed within our son. I told Ethan to open it. As he unfolded the pages, his mother's voice seemed to return through every elegant line of handwriting. The letter contained advice about choosing a life partner, about recognizing genuine love in a world filled with hidden motives, about protecting one's heart without losing one's kindness. Then Ethan reached a particular sentence, and he broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he read the words again. Watch how people behave when they believe there is nothing left to gain from you. The sentence cut through the darkness in his mind like a beam of light. It perfectly described what had happened the night before. The moment Chloe realized she could never touch a single dollar from the trust, her mask had shattered. She had become vicious, cruel, vindictive. She had insulted Ethan, threatened him, promised to ruin his life. Her love had existed only as long as the money remained accessible. Have you ever met someone who saw a vault instead of your kindness? As I watched my son cry, I knew something important was happening. The cleansing had begun. These were not tears of longing for Chloe. They were tears of regret. Regret for allowing a stranger's greed to trample the values his mother and I had spent a lifetime teaching him. Regret for ignoring the warning signs. Regret for mistaking manipulation for love. Most importantly, Ethan finally understood something he had resisted for years. The fortress I built had never been intended to imprison him. It had been built to protect him from predators, protect him from exploitation, protect him from exactly the kind of person Chloe had proven herself to be. Slowly, Ethan wiped his eyes. Then he looked up. For the first time in a very long while, I saw certainty in his expression. The cracks in his spirit had begun to mend. His mother's words had reached places my warnings never could. The naive young man, blinded by devotion, was gone. In his place sat a man who finally understood the value of boundaries, a man carrying both his mother's wisdom and his father's resolve. He rose from the sofa and folded Eleanor's letter carefully. Then he slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I know what I have to do," he said quietly. That was all. No anger, no shouting, no hesitation, just certainty. A few minutes later, he climbed back into his car and drove toward West Loop. He intended to end the marriage. At least that was what I thought. What I did not know was that Ethan had spent the entire night preparing something of his own, something neither Chloe nor I had anticipated. He was not returning with only divorce papers. He was carrying a weapon far more devastating than any legal document. Over the years, Chloe had built her entire identity on social media. The glamorous lifestyle, the luxury photographs, the carefully edited image of success. Everything was a performance, and Ethan possessed evidence capable of exposing every lie behind that performance. The fake consulting business, the hidden debts, the purchases made with his money, the messages she never expected anyone else to see. By the time Chloe realized what he had brought with him, it would already be too late. Because for the first time since their wedding, Ethan was no longer fighting to save the marriage. He was fighting to reclaim his life, and that made him far more dangerous than Chloe had ever imagined. Ethan walked into the West Loop apartment like a master builder arriving to demolish a structure that had long been condemned. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by half-packed suitcases and scattered designer clothes. She assumed Ethan had returned to apologize, to beg, to continue serving as the personal bank account she had relied upon for years. A smug smile spread across her face. The contempt in her eyes was impossible to miss, but that smile vanished the instant Ethan tossed a stack of divorce papers and an eviction notice onto the coffee table in front of her. The atmosphere inside the apartment changed immediately. Everything intensified. This was not the same man who had left my house the day before. The heartbroken husband was gone. In his place stood someone who had finally opened his eyes. Ethan's voice rang through the room with a firmness Chloe had never heard before. He began laying out the financial reality of their marriage. One document after another. One fact after another. One lie after another. He produced detailed bank statements, records stretching back over 2 years. The numbers told a devastating story. During their entire marriage, Chloe had contributed only $900 to their shared expenses. And even that amount had not come from her own earnings. It was a reimbursement generated from charges she had secretly placed on Ethan's accounts. She had not invested a single dollar into their future. Not one. She had only taken, spent, consumed, lived comfortably on someone else's labor. The color drained from Chloe's face. She jumped to her feet and attempted to interrupt, attempted to explain, attempted to manipulate. But Ethan never gave her the opportunity. Every sentence he spoke cut through another layer of deception. Then he revealed the next piece. The fake consulting business. The company that existed only on social media and in Chloe's imagination. No legitimate operations. No real clients. No genuine income. Only appearances. Then came the footage. The hidden camera recording from my office. The video showing Chloe secretly entering the room and searching through private family documents. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. But Ethan was not finished. His final move was the one she never anticipated. He had already shared the evidence with the individuals and companies that had helped sustain her carefully crafted online image. The sponsors, the collaborators, the business contacts, the people who believed they were associating with a successful professional. Now they were seeing the truth. The collapse was immediate and brutal. Her phone began vibrating non-stop, notification after notification. Contract cancellations, partnership terminations, requests for explanations, public distancing statements. The carefully manufactured image she had spent years building crumbled within hours. The glamorous influencer vanished. The luxury lifestyle vanished. The admiration vanished. All that remained was panic. Pure panic. For the first time, Chloe understood what it felt like to lose everything at once. The tears came, but nobody believed them anymore. Nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody came to her rescue. The performance was over, and the audience had left. Under the supervision of building security, Chloe packed the remainder of her belongings and left the apartment. The humiliation was complete. She rolled her suitcase toward the elevator without once looking back at Ethan, without saying goodbye, without offering an apology. The apartment felt strangely empty afterward, yet somehow lighter, cleaner, like a dangerous crack had finally been removed from the foundation. I was waiting in the lobby when Ethan emerged from the building. The moment I saw the expression on his face, I knew something had changed. For the first time in years, he looked free. Not happy, not yet, but free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from the weight he had been carrying for far too long. As we walked toward the parking garage together, I glanced at him and saw something that made me think of Eleanor. Strength. Quiet strength. The kind that survives storms. The kind that learns from pain instead of surrendering to it. Our family had endured the worst of the tempest and remained standing. The structure had held, but the story did not end there. 2 years after that painful reckoning, something remarkable entered Ethan's life. Someone unexpected. Someone who would prove that Eleanor's wisdom had been right all along. Because sometimes a foundation must be cleared of every rotten beam before something truly beautiful can be built upon it. 2 years passed quickly after the financial storm named Chloe. The old house Eleanor and I had built was once again filled with light, warmth, and laughter. On the living room sofa, Ethan sat playing his guitar. Beside him was Lily, a young woman whose smile seemed to brighten every corner of the room. Unlike Chloe, Lily never looked at the expensive crown molding on the ceiling to estimate its value. Instead, she spent her time studying the old family photographs displayed throughout the house. She often asked about Eleanor, not out of curiosity about inheritance, not out of calculation, but out of genuine respect. She wanted to know about Eleanor's love of music, her kindness, her dreams, the stories behind the photographs. I stood quietly in the kitchen doorway and watched them together. For the first time in many years, I felt complete peace. An architect understands that once a rotten structure has been removed, space becomes available for something stronger to be built in its place. Lily was that new foundation, the missing piece our family never knew it was waiting for. She loved Ethan for who he was, not for the $2.5 million in the trust, not for the house, not for the future inheritance, simply for the man himself. And that made all the difference. As I look back on everything that happened, there is one lesson I want to leave with you. Throughout life, you will encounter people who see kindness as an opportunity rather than a virtue. They wear polished smiles, they say all the right words, but beneath the surface lies an endless hunger for what belongs to someone else. The hardest truth I learned is this: good people cannot always be protected by goodness alone. Sometimes kindness needs boundaries. Sometimes compassion needs strength. Sometimes love needs rules. Build those boundaries before you need them. Protect the people you care about. Protect your family. Protect your future. Because kindness without strength often becomes an invitation to exploitation. In the end, our story reached a deeply satisfying conclusion. Justice prevailed. Truth survived. And the values Eleanor spent her life defending remained intact. Thank you for spending this time with Dad's real-life revenge. Remember this: as you move through your own journey, storms will come. People will disappoint you. Foundations will be tested. But if your principles are strong enough, your life can withstand even the fiercest winds. And sometimes after the storm has passed, the view becomes more beautiful than you ever imagined.